Hi artists and welcome back to my channel. My name is Margot Halleck and today's video is going to be all about the absolute easiest way to paint a landscape. And I would know because I do this literally every single day for a living, and I get tons of clients who come to me to illustrate, wedding venues, hotels, resorts, you name it. So whether it's the hills of Tuscany or a barn somewhere in, the landscape of Vermont, if you want to illustrate a landscape, but for it to be not a scary endeavor and to be easy and fun, then this is a tutorial for you because I am revealing all of my secrets. All right, so today we are illustrating a venue in Italy called Borgo San Vincenzo, and this is a project for a client. So first thing that I do is bring the photograph that I am going to be working from onto the computer and use a image editing software like Photoshop, for example, to scale it down so that it fits onto an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Then we're going to print it out, so simple as that, which we will then trace on a piece of tracing paper. So right here, I created my tracing and I'm going to fix it to my sketchbook so I can reference it. And I know what you're thinking, artists, this is cheating. And yes, I'm admitting it, I am cheating. All right, now that we have our drawing done, the next part will be transferring that drawing to our watercolor paper. All right, are you ready for the next cheat? Here we go. So I have my sketch, and what I did was photocopy that sketch, sizing it up to the exact dimensions of my workable surface. So my watercolor block is larger than your typical 8.5 by 11 or even a 9 by 12. So I used the photocopy function to scale up that image. So now it's going to work perfectly on that surface. So I'm going to tape it down so that the joinings in the middle are not going to shift around, since I had to use 2 pieces of paper to get that to tile properly. And I'm just using whatever I have on hand. Honestly, just regular, unexciting Scotch tape. Now that that's done, I'm going to put my sketchbook to the side. Always helpful to have a visual reference of the original sketch, but I'm going to transfer this image using a image transferring technique that I have. And I have a video that goes step by step into exactly how I do this using a regular pencil, HB or whatever you have available, to help to transfer that image onto whatever surface you're working from. So right here, that's what I'm doing. I have just coated the entire back of my photocopy. I'm going to tape it down with some artist tape. And then I'm going to get a ballpoint pen, or I guess you could use a pencil too, and trace over that image to transfer it over. And artists, this is not a substitute for learning how to draw in perspective, that kind of thing. But if perspective drawing and getting an accurate representation of your landscape and whatever landmarks are going on your subject, if that stresses you out, then this is a way to eliminate that and go straight to the fun part, which is painting, and get something really nice as a result. So, yes, definitely brush up on drawing technique and try to get better. But, I think these types of hacks and these types of tips are a great way to either speed along the process, if like for me, you're on a time crunch, or if this aspect of painting is part of what stresses you out. And so I'm all about like just remove any unnecessary stress. I mean, we're already stressed out enough in our daily lives that we don't need something extra to contribute to that. So if drawing isn't your thing, just, skip forward and fast forward through that like I did. All right, so I am wetting my watercolors and getting them all prepped to bring onto the paper. And what I'm going to do now is I'm putting a layer of color on all the various elements on my page. We are not focusing on any details whatsoever. We're not getting into the weeds here. It's all about creating a blanket of color on all the various elements that will show up on your illustration. So for me, this villa is sort of a tan color, and I'm just going to coat it with that color, leaving out any elements that I want to be white, which are not going to be very many, to be honest. And I'm going to do the same thing for everything else. So I've got a little bit of a sky going on. I'm going to use wet on wet technique to get that sky filled in, really relaxing and not letting anything get too precious or, trying to over control the situation, because at this point, we're just laying the foundation. Super, super relaxed. So I know know a lot of people get really, really, like stressed out and intimidated by things like landscapes. And the key to it is really having a step-by-step approach and not jumping into everything with like the same amount of like crazy detail. And I'm a type A, very like OCD, control freak kind of person. So, if I can do it, I'm sure you can too. I promise you. So we have a little bit of a sky, and I left some of the areas without as much color as others. And that eventually, as it bleeds, will start looking more like clouds and, those natural imperfections that happen that you see in the atmosphere and the sky. So here we go, blocked off that. And we're going to move on to the green hills. And again, here, same thing as with the rest, like the villa, the sky. We're just creating a wash over everything, making sure, well, I am anyway, because that's not a desired effect for my painting to let it touch the blue, because I don't want those two colors to bleed into each other. But if I were doing something a little bit looser and I wanted it to bleed, like right here for these bushes, then I can allow that wet on wet to, kind of create patterns and irregularities and textures. And if, for example, the surface is still wet, you can always change your mind. So like I just did right now, I'm like, I don't really feel that texture right there. So I'm gonna, move that paint around. And while things are still wet, you can still move things around. And honestly, even when it's dry, there's still stuff that you can do to fix undesired effects. I mean, nothing is right or wrong. It's just about whether or not it is a desired effect and finish that you want for your painting. So I'm alternating between two different greens and trying to build a little bit of that background to not be 100% uniform. And you'll see as the paint starts to dry and as I start to build up the layers, you'll love, or I love, how those textural effects and how those, those irregularities make it look a lot more natural and make it look just a lot more interesting to the eye. So I'm going to finish that up, take a sip of coffee, and let that layer dry before I come back with my next layer. So here's what it looks like so far, which is not much of anything. But here's where things get interesting. We will move on to layer number 2. And so now we start to bring in a little bit of a darker tone. So I'm bringing in the roof. If you have a roof, if you have trees, if you have elements that are darker than that base layer, now's the time to start filling them in. And again, here we are not yet being precise with details. We are just kind of like color. It's like a coloring book, and try to color in the elements that are darker on that picture. So I'm going to use a darker green for some areas like my bushes, and I'm actually mixing sap green with like a darker, what is this, like an undersea green from Daniel Smith. And I'm going to start painting in using this sort of like modeled, brushy, what do you even call this? Like scrubbing. It's called scrubbing, scrubbing technique, to get those bushes to look a little bit bushier. And those tall trees. And I just love to let those areas bleed into one another and sort of taking a page from the Impressionists. Like it's not exact, but it's kind of giving you the impression and that feeling of being a bush without necessarily having to like be super photorealistic about it, which I think is a great way to approach a landscape painting and make it have a ton of personality. Now I'm going to create more details, building up. So as you can see, I'm going layer by layer. So with the first layer, it was just about backgrounds. Then, you create another layer above it for a little bit of a darker value, and then a darker, and you kind of move upwards and build the dimension of the painting kind of like how you would layers of a diorama. So, I'm adding the windows, I'm adding the tiling on the roof, and I'm just creating these textures here and there. So for the windows, I literally I'm painting like a line and filling that in. And we're gonna tackle the details of this painting a little bit later. So right now everything looks like it's kind of like soft focus, like if you were taking a photo and everything was still a little bit blurry. And as we move deeper and deeper, or not deeper, but like further and further into our painting, everything will start to like crystallize and become more in focus as we go. But right now, I'm just kind of focusing on getting a wide variety of different types of brush strokes, different textures, different line weights, different values. All of that contributes to the vocabulary and the visual interest in your painting. So keep going, and I'm adding more of these vineyards because I like that effect. And right now I have a painting that looks partially finished. I mean, we have, a bunch of details, but what I'm going to do now, and this is where it gets really fun, is I'm going to grab a pen, and I have my Mont Blanc Meisterstruck fountain pen, which I inherited from my father. And you can actually use any pen. So whether it's a micron, a pencil would be fine, a ballpoint pen, whatever you have. And right here, just start to fill in whatever details selectively. So the idea is not to go over everything, but just hand select whatever details you want to pull into focus. So for me, it's this villa and maybe a couple of trees in the foreground just to kind of bring your eye to that area. And I'm not going to do this on the entire painting. I'm just choosing certain elements and certain areas to lead your eye towards. And what I love about this is it just gives the sketch or the illustration like a more spontaneous and more expressive quality. Like if you were flipping through someone's travel journal and discovered a painting that was scribbled there in haste, and you're just capturing the essence of the scene as opposed to being very photographic about it. And if you're not loving and you're not digging this whole pen thing, then you can do this with your paints. So just get your sharpest round tipped brush and you can do these exact same details with a traditional brush. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and to subscribe. And also let me know in the comments if you know a technique like this or if you've done something like this before. I am an artist in my own little studio, in my own little bubble, doing my thing. But there are plenty of people out there doing, different things, having different techniques that work for them. So let me know how you tackle your landscapes and if any of these tips today will help you along in your process too. As always, thank you so much for watching and for joining me every week, and I will see you next time.